Yeah, here he is. How you doing, Ben?
Did good.
All right, it's 12 o'clock. It's called the Economic Development Authority regular meeting for Tuesday, January 23rd, 2024. Please call roll.
Larson.
Here.
Blair. Blair. Here. Grinde.
Here.
Hecht.
Here.
Horken.
Here.
Helms.
Here.
All right. Well, we need to recognize an outgoing member, Miss Diane Blair.
Yes.
Got a little something for you. Thank you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm going to head out.
Going back east?
No, I'm just going back home.
Okay.
Is that east or
It
south?
would be that way. So
Okay.
Southeast.
Thank you again, Diane,
Thanks.
It's fun, guys. Keep up the great work.
and good luck. Have fun.
You're still invited next week.
Yes, you
I
are.
know that.
I know, but
All right, approval of minutes from November 21st, 2023, regular meeting. All in favor?
Did somebody make a motion?
Yeah, I'll move approval of the minutes. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Bills and communications, review of accounts payable December 5th, 2023, December 19th, 2023, January 2nd, 2024, and January 16th, 2024. Any questions? We got Carla on hand. You can speed up on her.
It's just normal activity,
Okay.
utilities. If you look at it, there was some repairs done to some apartments, which, at Sunshine Terrace, that we just make sure when somebody moves up that they're kept up, and if there's any damages, they need to be fixed. that they
People
are.
moving in and out, basically.
Yes. Yep.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Thank you. All right, reports. Ooh,
They closed a bank account, and I have talked with them, and they are giving us the check and the new bank account information. We expect to have that in hand today.
great.
Maybe I didn't talk into the microphone well enough.
But no concerns or,
No,
okay,
no concerns at all. It's all taken care of. I
Good.
talked, like I said, I talked to the person,
Yep.
to the business proprietor, and they are giving us the check today. We expect to have the check today and the new ACH withdrawal information today, for beginning in February.
good deal. All right, B, director's reports, November 23rd and December 23rd.
Are there any questions?
Questions for Paul on that? Okay. Financial reports, November 23rd and December 23rd, or 2023.
Thank you. Everybody got the activity for each fund. So in the packet is just the cash balances included. If you look at those, the EDA general fund, of course, is in the negative, and that's how we budget for that. At year end, we transfer whatever the total amount is. And then this is a preliminary because we haven't done all of our audit items and adjustments. And so if you look at the 280 fund, which is a housing lot sale fund, there will be a transfer from that out to the general fund for residential rebates. So there'll be an adjustment out of that. And then just a few other activities. Otherwise, the other funds will pretty much be exactly what they are. So if there's any questions on that.
I worked with Carla during December because we knew that one account was going to have extra expenditures, but other accounts had not, other line items had not had expenditures, so we moved the money into that line item so that the council can ultimately authorize all of that.
Yeah, and actually, it doesn't have to be council approval if the department head stays within their budget and just
Yeah.
moves within their budget. We just work
So,
with the department
okay.
and do that.
And we're within the budgeted amount.
Yes.
Any other comments?
Just a question for Carla. Carla, what's your opinion on the balance of the cash in bank for Sunshine Terrace at 1.7 million? Is that the best use of our assets there to just?
We actually, it's not like it's just sitting there, we have a pooled account. So as a city as a whole, we look at investments. And so at year end, we will allocate those investments that we earned in the pool, and it'll go into each fund depending on what the balance is throughout the year. And then we apply interest to that. And if you remember last year, we actually changed the way we account for interest at year end. We don't have to adjust to the market value since we are in strictly government bonds and in CDs. We can adjust for home mortgages, which we only have like $1 million in that. So we won't have to worry about negative interest amounts like we had in the past because of fluctuation in the market. So at that 1.7, it will get interest for the year. It's just that it will be adjusted during our audit process, and you'll see that when our audit is done. So, yeah, so it is being invested, so. Other questions?
Good, Brian?
Good question, though, thank you.
Thank you. Let's see here, MIF loans.
Periodically, we provide you with the information regarding the MIP loan accounts, so you can see that people are current and what their loan amounts are. Okay. If you have any questions, please ask.
Any questions for Paul on the MIF loans? Thank
For
you.
people who don't know, it's Minnesota Investment Fund, it's a revolving loan fund.
All right, AE2S 2023 report on social media.
Strikes me I should say one more thing. We use the revolving loan fund to provide loans to businesses who are looking to expand. In particular, the interest rates, depending upon what they're doing, range from 1% to 4%, and it's up to a 10-year repayment period for these loans.
And I just want to add, there's 1.7 million in that fund, so if you know of businesses that are looking for additional funding besides banking and the regular routes, to come and check with Paul.
And it's, we're starting to see a little bit more activity because of what the interest rates are in the private market or on the SBA type loans, Small Business Administration type loans. And it's one of several tools that the EDA has to help businesses. One of the other items later on the agenda is a discussion of an additional use for the Border Cities Enterprise Zone tax credit funds. We'll get to that in a little bit, okay?
All right, social media report.
That's the annual report. It shows that there's been growth, and we've had a lot more viewing, and that's encouraging.
Any questions or comments? Okay. Unfinished business.
Done.
New business, 2024 AE2S agreement.
This is a renewal of the agreement. It shows 6 additional hours of time. The cost has been creeping up. One of the things that came up in October when we had the meeting on economic development was that there's concern among the business community and people in general about the marketing efforts for the city. The city administrator and I have talked a little bit about this, and that we need to be thinking more globally. I think we need to be thinking, and I think Reed agrees, that we need to be thinking more globally, and that during this next year, while this is a renewal this year, next year, whomever's sitting in this seat will be working with you and with Reed about how to make this work better citywide and possibly be more expansive and possibly at a reduced cost as well, is what we're looking at. But it's not enough time between the time when we discussed it in October and today to make those kinds of changes, but there are things that we can do, and if we decide to make changes during the middle of the year, we have that ability to do that and not use the consultant any longer at that point in time. There's no penalty. It's not a contract that ties us into the year. All we have to do is give them like 30 days' notice. Okay?
So, one question, Paul. I understand the 6 additional hours for content creation. The inflationary increase, is that, I mean, I understand inflation, but why wouldn't they just adjust their rates accordingly?
I'm not sure I understand. The rates reflect the amount
Two
you
separate
have
things there,
reflects
okay.
inflation, and it reflects additional hours.
Okay, I'm read it differently.
Okay.
I
They had
understand.
originally proposed 12 additional hours, and I worked with them to reduce that to 6 additional hours.
Back that to 6, okay. I'll move to approve.
Need a second?
Yes, you need a second.
I'll second.
Okay.
Chair, if I could, just to add to the discussion Paul had too on the, I think circling back to our discussion in October, and Mark and Janelle are here from our meeting at the Eagles Club in October, but this is one item, whether you're interested or prepared to be able to have that discussion today or at a future meeting, I do think this is an item, to reiterate Paul's point, that we need to focus some more energy and conversation on how we want to see our city marketed from a coordinated perspective as a whole. It garnered a lot of attention and a lot of time at the strategy meeting in October. When we talk about city finances, EDA, city in a lump sum of the dollars available to market our community, this is really the funds we have available to do it at this point in time. And so as we talk about strategizing and how we're going to transition the future of the EDA and what the director's position looks like with Paul's upcoming retirement, I would like to see this topic get a lot of attention as part of that position, whether that is interns, whether it's we continue with A2S, how do we want to see that work? We all understand we could spend a lot more money on marketing than $10,000, but $9,000, but to really maximize the best use of, even if it's $9,000, how do we want to best use those $9,000? I don't have those answers available even in my mind today, but I'd love for us to plan for that discussion to be able to be had as this year moves forward.
And I've been reducing the size of the advertisements that we have in the newspapers too, in an effort to save money. So at some point, we need to be thinking globally, because there are other people inside of City Hall who benefit from marketing, whether it be Water and Light with their programs, or Parks and Rec with their programs, or whatever it might be. These are things that as a city we can do better in total, and all tap into that, as opposed to it being an economic development authority activity.
Water and Light does have their own budget too for advertising, because they have, all those ads on the radio, and they have TV ads too, so.
Yeah, I'm
Just
thinking
those
the
two
coordination.
departments? Just for right now?
Yeah. And Bonnie and I coordinated when she was here, some of the things, some of the activities.
Just to add to that, like in our Parks Department, we have staff, so certainly there's a cost to it, right? But it's internal city staff that are doing that marketing. We're not expending additional funds to pay for paid advertising outside of just the content our own staff are able to create
get
and
out there.
deliver
Okay.
on staff time.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. So the only paid advertising that I'm aware of would be through the EDA or through Water and Light.
Yeah, we buy certain, we have inserts in certain editions of the Herald and of the Exponent, for example. But there's really very little dollars that are put into that in the whole scheme of things.
So-
And we need to be looking at a broader perspective on how to do this.
So for promotional, like Parks and Rec, you guys use your own, is that a budgetary number for promotional? Like, say you wanted to advertise a hockey tournament or something like that comes back directly to Parks and Rec and not the Blue Line Club, or does that not exist?
At this point, it really doesn't exist, other than free social media marketing, right? So
Okay.
if we're putting out marketing materials on social media, we're creating it in-house for free, other than the staff person's time to do it. We're not using an outside graphic designer to put together any of that work at a paid service. It's all being done internally and then pushed out for free through the free services that social media provides us. To this point, that's the extent of the advertising. The free services through Water and Light with the monthly billing, the free social media, and our web.
And when something like that happens, we make sure that we share it as well, so that it gets a little bit extra exposure.
So like in the past, there used to be something sent on, the activities out of
Yeah.
Park and Rec. None of that's done. There's, in the Water and Light billing, it puts in there that it'll be opening here and through social media. That's, as Reed was saying, there's no other publishing cost done.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that I do is I look at the weekly and monthly information from the Convention and Visitors Bureau as to what's on, and I make sure that we know that for social media, so we can highlight those items and share those items too. Go to their website and share them so people are aware of things that are going on in East Grand Forks.
Is there a reason that we haven't had a collaborative effort more through all the departments to do a marketing, like a full marketing scheme with a budget that comes from all?
I would say, no, there's not a good reason we haven't done that, other than it hasn't been addressed as a high-level priority until recently, right?
So is that where you're seeing of where we want to take it to?
Yeah, that's some of the discussion Paul and I have had, and I don't think internally in city staff right now, we have the right marketing personality professional to be able to really lead that effort. That's a very specialized skill set someone has that we don't currently have on our staff. We have some people that have some knowledge of how to use social media, but when you look at those posts, if you compare the posts that AE2S is putting out in comparison to the posts that Park and Recreation is putting out, and it's no means to tear down any current employee we have,
Right.
but they're on different levels. The AE2S materials are very professionally designed. You can see that. The Park and Rec or on the City of East Grand Forks social media pages, you can tell that they're using free services. We're taking a cell phone photo and trying to manipulate it to make it look as good as we can, right?
Yeah.
So there's values there that we have to play within. But to your question, that was one of the things that I thought we heard at our October meeting is we need to find a way, and it doesn't need to cost a lot of money or even be all that difficult, but we need to find a way to almost have, in my mind, like a once a month coffee in the morning where we invite city businesses to come into City Hall, sit down for a cup of coffee with all the different department heads and say, here are the events we have for the next month. And then how can we coordinate who's going to try to push that message out, through what means can we push it out. We have, right now, to your point, Justin, we have a very broad array of social media pages in the city. The City of East Grand Forks has a page, the Police Department has a page, the EDA has a page, the Parks and Recreation Department has a page, the library has a page, right? And they're all kind of doing their own thing on their own little island. That's the challenge and the goal is we need to figure out a way to kind of connect and coordinate all of those together.
And that's something to work on this year as we move forward. It's not something that can be done in just a couple of weeks, but it's something that requires some thought and effort and bringing everybody together to do it. I suspect we'll do some work internally first. I'm not trying to speak for you, but we have to bring the various departments together about what's going on and then start bringing in the other businesses, the businesses in the city, so that they can take advantage and we can share the information that they've got.
It's like any other software, garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
All right, so we got a motion from Ben and a second from Brian. Please call roll.
Larson.
Yes.
Grinde.
Yes.
Hecht.
Yes.
Horken.
Yes.
Helms.
Yes.
Thank you. 2024 renewal of city revitalization program, Gate City Bank.
Gate City Bank called me to renew the program for this year. In general, we are very pleased with what happened. There were 7 loans and over $100,000 lent to people last year. We ran into one issue that the people who got the loans did not always return to the city to get permits. and we are working to address that issue to make sure that they get their permits. We'd like to continue with this because it's a great benefit to people who live in the city. They get to reinvest in their homes. The one thing I'd like to suggest is that we increase the value, the assessed value that's eligible from $300,000 to $400,000. And I would ask that you make that endorsement. And there are a couple ideas that we have on how to make sure that people will return for permits. Okay?
I'll move to increase assessment value.
Need a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Ben. Please call roll.
Can I ask? before
Yes.
we do that? You mentioned the couple ways to do it. Do you highlight those in here? I read through.
No, I
it.
did not. because
Okay.
We've been working on them.
Okay.
One of the ways is a handout that's given at the bank and here. One of the ways we could include is something, have them sign, because they bring the papers here, and I sent forward them to Gate City Bank, and have them sign a reminder that they agree to return for permits. One of the ways has been to get them to sign a waiver where Gate City can give us the information when a loan is provided. So we're looking at different options.
Okay.
And it may be one or more of all of those things that happens, Ben.
All right, thanks, Paul.
Thank you. So a motion by Justin, seconded by Ben. Please call roll.
Larson.
Yes.
Grinde.
Yes.
Hecht.
Yes.
Horken.
Yes.
Helms.
Yes.
I got one question on this too, Paul. Is this program only for primary home owners? So if somebody bought, say, an older property that is a landlord, that they're going to rent the property, is that program available to them?
No, there are other programs that they could tap into, but this is not that program.
Okay, I just want clarification on that. I didn't know.
For example, we are eligible for this, for the rural development, U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development, and there are some programs that they have that will do home improvements that you can tap into for things like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Use of border cities tax credits for employee retention.
We have generally used the Border Cities tax credits to reduce the property taxes, but that's not the only way they can be used. I've run into a couple of situations in the last year where there appear to be funds on the state level, but when it comes down to actually tapping into those funds, we've not been able to tap into those funds. So one of the ways that we can use the Border Cities funds is to provide tax credits for retention or new employees. It's $1,500 of tax credits per retained employee. It's $3,000 of tax credits for new employees. This is basically oriented toward industrial activities, industrial type activities. So this would be an option to use if a business runs into a roadblock. The advantage is it gives us a different way to help a business. The disadvantage is, and if you're not making enough, if you have enough other deductions so that you can't use the tax credits, it might not help you as much as using it the other ways would do it. So that's to bring it forward. I'd like you to be able to talk with some businesses if we run into issues, and move forward doing that if you agree.
So Paul, you'd like to speak with some local business owners as well as the state to
No.
understand the flexibility?
The state, I've talked to the state. The state has identified this as a way to do things. I want to be able to talk when we run into issues on a local business where we are running into roadblocks for other funding programs that might be sales tax reductions or training programs. This would be a way to substitute funds for those types of programs, for example, so that I can, when we run into those, I can then talk to business. We have a different way to do this. You need $40,000. $40,000 equates at retained employees to about roughly 25 employees, okay? So we can do that if they have 25 employees, for example.
What's earmarked out of that 106,000 right now for outgoing that we
We have a
annually
balance
use?
of about $250,000 right now.
And do you know projection-wise where that fund is going to be at a year
Yes.
from now?
Yes. We are using up right now slightly less than the 100,000.
Okay.
So it will maintain at that level. And because we have only projections for uses out about 3 years, at that point, it will start to increase, Ben.
Okay.
So I'm looking for uses on how to make sure that we can benefit our businesses. I've had 2 contacts from businesses that would like to use it this year for things that they've accomplished, and we'll figure out which way is the easiest way to work. If you agree with this, we may, instead of using the property tax, we may use retained employees.
Is there any rules of, a company can only use it so often, or can the same company get
We
that
can
tax
use this
credit?
every year.
Okay, I
This-
mean,
This
each
program can
company.
be used every year by the same company.
Okay, that's,
In other words, if it's Anderson Improvements or something like that, Ms. Anderson could get tax credits this year, get tax credits next year, get tax credits the year after, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I would move on this. I think we should give you all the tools that we can to help local business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. Please call roll.
Yes.
Grinde,
Yes.
Blair,
Yes.
Horken,
Yes.
Helms,
Yes.
motion carried.
Draft Economic Development Strategy for discussion by EDA City Council invitees, January 30th meeting.
Mark Schill is here from Praxis, and he's going to walk through a PowerPoint presentation on the areas where we think that we should be going. The next steps are going to be, how do we get there? Okay, so we're going to do what we should be doing first. I just want to remind everybody that there's a January 30th meeting at about 11:45 or noon at the Eagles Club. There are people who were invited, but I've not heard a whole lot, so if you received an invitation, you need to let me know so I can know how many lunches to order. Since it's a noon meeting, we think that you probably would have some type of a small lunch anyway. Okay? So get in touch with me and let me know. But at this point, if I may, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Please.
Great, thanks, Paul. So I know you had a more detailed report from that October meeting at your last meeting, so we won't cover too much of that, but we will cover a little bit of some of the key takeaways Paul and I were looking at as we move forward here and take the next step with this. And so most of this is really 2 things. One is, what are the core priorities at a high level across all of the work? And you've already talked about a couple of them already. And then we tried to work to develop some kind of a framework or a structure around what the EDA is doing. So we can pretty clearly say, okay, here are the roles, here is the work, here are the categories, to give you a tool to make decisions, to say, okay, we want the next EDA director to focus on these things. We want to allocate resources these ways. If we're looking at a pot of funds, you have a structure then to disperse that money based on priority, right? And so that's really the idea, almost less of a plan as much as it is a tool to say, how do we all get on the same page as to what the EDA's role is? And so that as we look to add or to cease programs or to make decisions about how to allocate funds, we've already done some of that pre-thinking on what the priorities should be. So, that meeting had about 40 people there. A lot of you were in attendance, but I think the key takeaway was, one, that there was 40 people there. That's a pretty solid group discussing the future of the community. And I would say it's about half business people. The chamber had a strong presence and did some invites that brought some people in. And then a good representation from this group, this board, the city council, the planning and zoning commission, and staff members as well. And so I think that is one good takeaway, is sometimes you try to do these meetings and you get 3 or 4 people, right? So to have that level of engagement tells us something, right? And I think it feeds right into that number one key takeaway that we had, which was there's engagement. There's a desire for action. There's a pretty strong consensus that the EDA itself is important and the work the EDA is doing is important. Not to say it couldn't be modified or shifted a little bit, but the EDA matters. We need to keep focusing on this issue of economic development. A lot of talk about the lack of space as the key constraint for commercial business, whether it's sites, whether it's commercial real estate. That came up repeatedly. As you already talked about, that number three, a lot of talk about communications, marketing, positioning, the volume of that, who are we targeting, how do we integrate across the city. Sometimes that discussion is less specific, about what that should be, and more of this general sense about how do we make the city more visible, how do we be more proactive. I think that was more what we heard as compared to say, do these specific things, right? Another key one, number four, is just a lot of talk about the strengths of the community, the intangible stuff. Well, the tangible in sense of the quality of life, the assets, but the community assets. I think when people said, who are we and what do we have to offer, it really focused on that, and that manifested in the goal for economic development being really community development focused. And then the last one I think is important in the next short term. At the end of the meeting, there was some consensus to say the EDA as an entity should shift its role in housing out of becoming a primary lot developer or a land developer. Not to say that housing doesn't still matter, that it's not still a key issue and a key constraint, but it's that role. What is the work around housing? And I think, again, back to the discussion about Paul's successor or how do you staff the city, do you want someone that has the land development skill set? Do you want someone that has more of a marketing skill set or something else? But I think that's an example of where you may have these two competing just within the issue of the job description for the EDA director is what are we looking for here? And the idea with this effort is to help make that decision easier, right? And so, another key theme was this idea of growth, of progress. I know the news media picked up on this a little bit about the question of stagnancy and stuff. So I pulled some of the data. One of the data sources I've got allows you to zero in that federal and state employment data is only by county. So it's tough to get something for East Grand Forks, but I've got a data set, I got the zip code. And so there is an estimate there of that. So it's an estimate. That's that blue line. So the data does somewhat confirm, right, that, it's kind of flat here. I would point out, though, the two-county region, Grand Forks and Polk counties, is pretty flat in the last decade or so as well, right? And so some of that is regional. There's a number of reasons why. We don't need to get into that today, but there's been a lot of interesting things happening in this region that have sort of tamped things down a little bit between the Air Force Base, up and down, ag prices, Canadian exchange rates, all of these different external factors, I think, that have limited Grand Forks to a certain extent. But I think, so that is, the mentality is somewhat justified in terms of what's happened. I think it's important to look at the structure of the economy here. Now, this is, again, the 56721 estimate. Is if we look at the distribution of jobs, where are we strong, where are we heavy, where are we over-concentrated, where are we lighter, where are we under-concentrated? And I think, it's no one's surprise that ag production and ag comes up pretty high, almost 8 or 9 times higher than the national average. So here, 100% would be average. The same distribution as the rest of the country. I think it's important to point out that manufacturing is almost 3 times higher in East Grand Forks as compared to national average. So this is a manufacturing-centered community. Polk County is the same way. Actually, much of northwest Minnesota is the same way. We got some world-class manufacturing companies in this region. But also, you look at Crookston, you look at the Foston region in Polk County are very strong, much stronger than the Grand Forks side, actually. Educational services, private schools fit in there. Construction is above average by about 25%. Healthcare is basically right-sized. I did forget to put food service and hospitality in there. That would be a 137. So that's, again, the restaurant communities here is pretty strong, 37% above average. Then you get down, transportation and warehousing is actually below average, but it's one of the higher ones. Retail is about 10% below average in terms of the number of jobs as a share of total. And wholesale trade. On the right side, those are some of the lower ones. Utilities, now with the public utility, that shifts that, right? Real estate's a little bit lower. Administrative services. Professional and technical is a key one. That's everything from high-tech types of services to engineering firms, to accounting, to lawyers, that sort of thing. Arts and rec and then finance is about half the size in East Grand Forks as it quote-unquote should be for the size, the number of jobs are here. So I think the idea here is to think about what is the structure, what are we working with, where are we heavy, where are we light in terms of industry. One other thing I point out is drilling into this data, the NCTC jobs were not showing up. So I don't know if NCTC reports all of those back through Pennington County or what the story is there. Thief River, yeah. And so that's not included here, so keep that in mind. Obviously, that's a key employer. Then I said, okay, how do we compare in East Grand Forks to the entire region, the two-county region? And so again, up here, ag is high across the region. That makes sense. You know, the utilities over on the Grand Forks side, Nodak, Minn Kota, you know, that makes sense. Construction is higher in East Grand Forks as a share, but it's still average. But here you go, you see manufacturing. You know, so in the two-county region, it's up to, you know, if you include the state mill on North Dakota side, it probably gets to 100%, right, about average. But it's heavier weight over here on the Polk County and East Grand Forks side. Wholesale is a little bit lower. Now here, retail matters, right? Because this is a regional thing. The customers are local. The region is still about a little bit over. We have, quote unquote, too many retail jobs. Now, it's a regional center. It's a college town, right? That makes sense. Finance is low just in the region, so it's not too alarming, you know, that this is lower in East Grand Forks. You look at the professional technical services, same thing. This has been a focus in the region, is how do we boost that? And then accommodation, and here's your accommodation in food. You know, about average in the two counties, but there is a higher concentration in East Grand Forks. Not surprising. But still useful to think about, you know, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses?
What was the management part? Is that like property management?
Yeah, so no, that would be, so the way this is tracked is the actual business location, what their industry is, right? And so what's tricky about that one is that would be only places where the office is just the headquarters, right? So there's companies headquartered here probably that's their only location, but maybe they mostly do manufacturing there, so they show up in manufacturing. An extreme example would be Boeing, for instance, moved their headquarters out of the Seattle area and into Chicago. So that Chicago location would be under management. The Seattle location would probably be under aerospace manufacturing, right? So it depends on the actual physical location. Again, I would say that doesn't necessarily mean that it's zero here. Again, because it's estimated with the zip code trickery. This is just to give us sort of this feel. So I think the key takeaways here is probably manufacturing being 3 times higher than average is maybe more than most people would think, right? Right. You know, and the typical citizen, economic development is really retail, right? And it's what are the stores, you know, what is my experience, right? And I think one of the challenges in economic development is shifting that narrative a little bit to say, you know, we're focusing on some of these other industries because it's building wealth, it's boosting economic activity, it's creating these ripple effects that benefit restaurants, that benefit retail, right, and these other sectors. Here's a breakdown of the manufacturing sector. So there's about 750 jobs in the city. Food manufacturing is very high. Crystal sugar would fall into that bucket. Machinery, primary metals, transportation equipment would be vehicles, fabricated metals, printing, and some others. And then the key here, too, is, you know, you look at total compensation, is high across these sectors. One reason why focusing economic development efforts on some of these is a good thing, because it's creating this impact, these ripple effects, more customers for our businesses in the community. So we talked a lot about retail too. Mayor Gander shared a pretty good anecdote about, you know, trying to recruit a fleet business into the community, right? And some of the efforts on retail and how do you, and it's sort of swimming upstream. I think it's important to look at, here's the 5-state region, jobs in retail going back to 1990. And so this is the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa. So it's interesting, over here on the left, there's the last boom in the 90s of the shopping malls and the big box stores, right? E-commerce exploded, and you look at, you know, it's been flat. The national chart looks the same. So I think it's, for as much people want to talk about retail, nationally, there hasn't been growth in retail as far as people working in it as a proxy for businesses in 20 years, right? So we've got to keep that in mind contextually. Here's the Grand Forks 2-county region for retail. You know, there's a lot of consternation in the last 5 or 10 years about the drop in retail in the community. Well, if you match this with the Canadian exchange rate, it was at par right around here, right? So there's these other factors. Speaking of external factors, this region has been pretty steady in retail for 20 years, 25 years. You can see the flood there, obviously the pandemic right there. But what was happening was more a recoil from this artificial boom that happened in Canadian shopping, right? So the context matters. The region's rebounded pretty well in retail in the last year or two. So for as much as we want to, retail dominates the public discussion about economic development, I think there's a question of what the opportunity really is there, right? In terms of new locations for retail, retail, the issues are really more national than they are what's maybe happening here in this community. So we talked about in that meeting, what's the most important goal. I just thought this is important context that 2/3 of people said housing, quality of life, community development, childcare, those sorts of issues. That's how people think about, okay, what do we want to improve here? What's our goal? No one in that, there's a lot of talk about growth in that day, but nobody, when we forced them, picked job growth, right? So again, it's what's motivating our efforts is to keep in mind, how do we frame this work knowing that people are looking at this as one of the goals, right? Is this community development piece. The other key one is at the very end, we asked people to rank some of these priorities. And I think the major takeaway is this number one by a mile here was this retention, working with the businesses that are already here. How do we as the EDA, leverage the success, the momentum that's happening? How do we do work that can help benefit that? All these other ones are pretty close together, right? Here's our communications one was second, marketing, supporting hospitality, housing, industrial park investments, commercial space, right? Community marketing is here too. Yeah, so that's a little bit more specific. And so some of the others, entrepreneurship and attracting from the outside, recruitment ranks 7th. Not to say that that should stop, but compared to retention and working with our current businesses, it's a lot different. So here's these 5 priorities. We said, okay, as we think about moving forward, what are our guideposts? How do we steer? Where do we focus? One is this priority on existing business. That's number 1. The second one is how do we focus on our programs, our efforts, our time around this commercial real estate shortage issue? Can we identify that, figure out ways? Are there ways to incent that, to work on it, to help improve that? Is there planning issues? Is there incentives we could do? Other things like that. This general focus here on marketing. Again, whether that becomes a staff person at the city that works on across the board, whether that's you outsource it, whether you hire someone under the EDA to do it, that's to be decided. But this issue was very strong coming out of this. The local business community was stepping up here. They want to be a part of the solution. They want to work. So I think finding ways as the EDA to leverage that and to keep including people. Reed mentioned, do we do a quarterly meeting with some of these businesses? Take them up on that offer, right? That could be very beneficial. And then again, this issue of discontinuing land development and looking at how do we reallocate that capacity? Say, take a couple things off the EDA's plate so we can do a better job at some of these other things. The last piece is the structure, is how do we break down the work of the EDA in a way that makes sense to us in this room, to the staff, to the city council, and to the community. So the first draft here we came up with these 4 buckets essentially is this local business development, new business development, the 3 C's, connecting, convening, communicating, marketing would be under that one. And then the land and the site development stuff would be the 4th. And so getting a little more specific, and then I think in the handout has even more detail. I cut out some of that for this, but this local business development, that includes the retention and expansion work, assistance programs, supporting the existing retail companies. The new business would be any attraction work we're trying to do to bring new companies in, and then any work we're doing focusing on entrepreneurship. So that's sort of two steps on that one. The 3 C's, that includes the marketing, that includes communications facilitation. That meeting in October, the EDA and the city calling people together, people showed up, right? That convening power matters. And using that, playing that role, that takes time, right? It's effort, but also being that person, the EDA being the person that people call when they're looking for something, looking for assistance, whether it's workforce, investment, whatever it may be, it's that role right there. Focus on quality of life, and then again, the workforce work. The workforce work we put under this because it's really more about partnerships. The EDA isn't going to lead anything on workforce, but it can be that connecting point. that broker, that facilitator around the workforce issue. And then the land development. One was this issue of how do we focus on the space available for economic development, and then whatever we're doing on housing as we define and redefine that. And so then the last piece here is we have this discussion on the 30th. We'd be very interested in any of your thoughts on how to steer that. Our thought was to talk about these last two pieces and see if people agree. What we plan to do is force folks to, let's prioritize these 4 buckets. You know, what's number 1, what's number 4? Just to help you get more information to make decisions on how to move forward is really the goal. And so we want to ratify both the work areas and the priorities. We want to then, within that, identify, okay, what are the specific things we're going to do under each of those? And we have, that's in that paper document you've got. How do we allocate resources then based on that? You know, if we decide, you know, there's never going to be a shortage of good ideas. It's going to be, what can we afford to do? And I think Councilmember Larson, you said pretty eloquently in that meeting in October, resources are limited, and this community has to live off of property taxes in order to fund economic development. That's a really tight situation. And so this prioritization and the resource allocation is a major piece of this. We can make a list a mile long of great ideas on what the EDA could do, and they'd all be good, right? That's not the problem. The problem is, how do we focus? And then redefining those priorities, and then again, restructuring the EDA, actually making the decisions, making those changes, defining the job description for Paul's successor, any restructuring you need to do. And probably the city fits into that. Where does the city plug in? What role? Maybe the EDA is doing something and you could offload to the city, you know, or vice versa, is actually making those decisions. So that's kind of where we're at. Any thoughts, any feedback, any discussion?
If we could develop some like tangible goals coming out of these conversations, you know, just as a way of like checking against ourselves, or, you know, I'm not entirely sure what those would be, but, you know, just for example, if population growth was important,
right,
we should say, what's our goal to get to 10,000 people? How are we going to do it? You know, having some actual numbers just helps me to kind of focus on things. Take it from the conceptual, which I think was the first meeting, to more like action items in the second meeting. I think that'll help keep things on track too, and get rid of some of maybe the complaining aspect of the first meeting is kind of in the rearview mirror, I think, and then now we
Yes.
And you know, that's all good, right? Like, that's tough conversations are what we're here for, but creating some like action items, ways to kind of move forward, and just keep this momentum going that we're building here.
Sort of success metrics, in other words.
I would think so.
Yeah, to help us evaluate where we're at.
Yeah, and we should be checking against them, you know, like state of the city, or here in these meetings, you know, what's our commercial sales tax revenue rate this year? Oh, you know, we're up. Okay, let's push that out. Things of that nature.
Yep.
I unfortunately was unable to attend, but thanks for, this is a lot of information. And part of what I see and hear is, should we be, you know, we're listing things in order of importance, and to piggyback on what Brian's saying, if we're trying to do 10 things, but we do 10 things at, you know, 10%, or we're putting our metrics where they matter in those top 3 things. So maybe prioritizing that list, or shrinking down that list to, not saying something's not important, but focusing where we should be focusing on, which I think is where you're leading us. Yeah. Like the housing thing. We all know, we've had these discussions in here, that we shouldn't be in the real estate business. Right. So let's quit talking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
yeah. So like, I like that point. Like, you know, that could lead into a conversation. Like, should the EDA just sell all the lots at once? Should we auction them off? And, you know, I'm just creating conversation points, right?
Right.
Like, maybe that's crazy, but at least we're like talking about it. Right. You know, like, it just.
And then it doesn't have to make a list anymore, because we're not in the business anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Everyone says no, don't do that. Keep going, status quo. Like, okay, but we kind of check that box at least. Childcare is the other one, right? Like,
yeah.
That's like the toughest of all nuts to crack. But let's talk about some real world opportunities. You know, Riverside Christian is going to move. There's a school there, and is that an opportunity? I'd really like to hear from some entrepreneurs and people in the business world. Like, what are some ideas on how to get things going here?
Yeah. And people are doing different things, which we can You know, Warren is going to own their own childcare center very quickly. We're doing
With
construction
sales
on that
tax.
now. With sales, I mean, there are ideas in the region that let's plug into some of those other avenues and see what's working.
Yeah, we met with Crystal Sugar. They want overnight childcare for their third shift. You know, they can't fill their third shift because they can't get childcare for the third shift. Well, like, at first you're like, well, who's going to do that? But like, let's talk through it. And
Right.
understand, is that a business model elsewhere? Okay, well then, is that something we could do here?
Could a major employer guarantee spots, right? You know, I think there may be a shift in the long run of childcare becoming an employment benefit similar to healthcare. Just because these larger employers are realizing if they don't participate in the solution, because the business is such a hard business to run, it's such thin margins and it's highly regulated, you can't just spin up a childcare operation out of thin air. And so these unique partnerships might be the solution.
Yeah, I worked on a project in Arkansas for a bit, and Tyson Chicken had the school on their like corporate grounds was like the elementary school because everyone worked there. And I know that's extreme, but you know, it is being done in other areas. So
I know DigiKey worked on having that overnight, and they run into problems because there's different issues on it and different ratio with kids, but I know DigiKey has gone through that, so there's a resource to talk to about how that's going to work or not, but I know DigiKey did try to work on that. I don't think they were successful, but I know they have worked on it. Maybe they have some that are successful, so that is a resource.
yeah, that'd be great.
So I think that is one of the goals here, one of the major goals on some of these discussion points like the lot development. Let's bring that decision to a head, right? And if everyone here agrees, and then we go to council and everyone there agrees, now you're empowered at this level to then make that change, right? And then, so then we don't have to talk about it anymore. We can keep moving forward. And there's maybe 3 or 4 of those things that incrementally, and then once those are handled, there's 3 or 4 more, right? And so the idea is through this structure, you can always be plugging in those things as appropriate and taking off the ones that don't matter anymore or were already done or whatever that may be. But at least there's a mechanism to do that, rather than say, oh, you know, whose responsibility is that, right? And try to bring some clarity to that. Because the reality is this is incredibly complex work, right? And we're trying to influence the social and economic situation in the community. And we have to decide what, you know, interventions we can make that can be effective with oftentimes indirect results, you know, and you know, EDA doesn't create jobs, right? It's not an employer, but it can create a fertile environment for jobs to be created, you know. But you can never, as an economic developer, stand up at the end and say, hey, we did this, right? Because that's not how it works. But yet, if Paul or, you know, a council member or the mayor didn't sit in a meeting a year ago and help make some connections, some business may never have found that opportunity or never moved in, right? And so it's, the tough part is, you know, everyone looks at it as, you know, what is the retail store down the street, the tangible, but the work is really a lot of times intangible, and it's brokering, it's facilitating and doing all this work behind the scenes that no one knows about and no one really can know about, and you can't even announce it because it's their project. It's a private project, right? It's up to them to announce. And so it's this really interesting catch-22 in the public side of how do we do this work and continue to justify it and continue to fund it without being able to draw a concrete line between, oh, is everything we do and, you know, 5% job growth, right, or whatever that may be.
Anything else?
Janelle wants to be able to say something on behalf of the chamber.
Yes, and I think prioritization is going to be pretty important for you all as well. So we appreciate co-sponsoring this strategic planning effort, and thank you to Mark for doing a very good job. It's great to see 40 business people show up, and when we're talking about East Grand Forks' future, the chamber is looking forward to being very involved in the plan, and thank you, the chamber.
Thank you. Thanks.
In general, are we headed in the right direction?
Depends upon who you ask.
We're asking this group.
Yes.
I think the framework of what we want to do to head in the right direction is there. And we're working that way. That, I mean, things may take time and be a slow process, but we're working towards it.
I think Brian hit it on the head when he said, we're done. Now the past is done.
Yeah.
Here's the information. how do we go forward?
How do we
you know?
move forward?
And we need to keep walking forward because no matter what, for some reason, this community likes to talk about what happened in 1997. You know, we always go back to that. Well, I was in high school. You know, I don't need to talk about 1997. You know, so let's move forward, quit looking behind us, and focus on what's ahead of us and solve some actual problems instead of talking about what's wrong.
And remember, economic development is a lot like planting an orchard. It's not like planting a crop that you're going to harvest each year. And it takes time for the orchard, for the trees to grow before you start to receive any returns from those trees. Not everyone grows. There's a lot that don't grow you have to replace. But it's a lot more like growing an orchard than it is like growing a bunch of row crops.
And I like what you said, Ben, because that's how guys like you and I deal with it, with what we do. Here, let's narrow this down here.
Right.
We got 10,
Solve
let's
the
go
problem.
to 3.
Yep.
And then we'll go from 4 to 6 afterwards.
Yep.
That's our life every day, ain't it, Ben? Thank you, everyone.
We don't need a vote.
What's that?
We don't need a vote of any kind.
Okay. So we don't need a vote of any kind. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you.